All right, hey guys, Sam back with you here. Second one today. Per the polling we did, requested was a look at STRAT to Bitcoin. Now this is a chart that looks so much like the alts. Now, so is it? There's a number of ways we could count this. Is it WXY? Could be WXYXZ. It's a couple of different ways we can count. I don't know at this point that it really matters here. So this, I did notice this. So if we pull from our proposed from this B wave or that dominant pivot, here we come right to the 50. So that's right of note. But then you look here, our target is down here. You got to pay attention to where 0 is. So it's very hard to get this to line up to show it right on 0, but that's very, very close to 0. So we've got a target. Excuse me, down here below 0. So, and we're not going to get that target, right? So they can take it right to 0. But I just make that point here is we did have a technical pivot, dominant pivot, dominant pivot, dominant pivot, right? It's all technical. But then if we look here, so taking that same idea, right, as to where we might be. So we saw we had a good reaction here. So not quite as deep here. So if that's an X and we don't. So here's 30, so that's shallow for a B, right? We've seen it, but then that has gotten to target. So then you look, well, maybe they're using this. Could that be it? That's not a great front run. Looks a little better here. Now I'm just using the next pivot down. Could be they use that. They've got two and through target. Hard to say, right? The one thing you can always count on is the dominant pivot. But let's think about whether or not that could be our low and just coming down here. Well, so I'm sitting here on a 4-hour. Sorry. Let's go to the hourly and see what that looks like. So here's that pivot up here. So proposed B looks like a fairly solid 2 there. So if we measure it, right, so from the swing high to our swing low, and if we're right about that being a 2, well, here's a candidate. But if we pull this over, right, it could be, but this is more likely here as we get to the 200%, right? But this is a little front run. But this looks like it's more, so if we look within that 3, we need this 1, 2, 3, 4 to give us our 5. Let's see, hang on a second. So if we allow for that as the 3, it looks like I can get an AB. Now I have a little bit of an expanded B wave here to give me that on the assumption that this is the 3. I mean, it looks better here given the scale here to go A, B, C. That looks like better symmetry than to think that the 3 is here and we've just gone A, B, C. It's possible. Right, we have to allow for the B wave to go beyond the 3. But so either way, whether it's here or here, this is our highest retracement. Meaning, so we're playing that as the 4. So we can look here to the 4. We get the 23.6 to the tick. So I lean into this as my count here, and this is that pivot because of that technical pivot we get there as a candidate for the 4. Well, if that's the 4, then we got to come down. We got to finish in 5. Well, working from that pivot. So let me pull this off here and then think about what we'd have here. So if we're right about this, it looks pretty solid as a 1, 2. So if we just take the length of the 1, project it from the 2, and then pull it over. It's a little off there. Let's get that right on. Excuse me. Well, it can't be here. So it can't be 1, 2, 3. We're not 100% here. This gets us down there. We get this little kind of crazy wick down here. But so this gets us through 100%. So we have a candidate here for our 3rd. It gets a little tricky over here. So it looked like we had A, B, possibly C. We were heading down. But given what we have now, I think this looks more like it's either we've had, so it's a couple of different ways to count it. So if we look here, if that's the 3 and we're going into, if this were the 4, well, how do we make that work? So if this is the 2 to the 3 low, well, we've gone to the 50, but can we get a clean ABC out of that? Well, that gets a little trickier here. So let's zoom in on this. So reasonable candidate for an A. There's the B. Well, now I can't finish it in 5, right? So I can go A, B, 1, 2, possibly now it's just a big diagonal, right? So we'd have the 3 would be in here with this ABC. We've overlapped the 1, right? So we have a candidate. Now here would be the disqualifier of this count. We'd have to rethink it. But we've had this deep 4. So given the idea that this may be a diagonal, we'd be looking for a relationship between the start of the 1, the pivot of the 3. So here, I'll pull this off just to clear up the chart. So if we think about that, here's my start of my 1. Here's the, oh, wrong one, pivot of the 1. Start of it to the pivot to the 2. Well, we've gone right into the high probability zone for a 3, but then we think, oh, well, we've overlapped the 1, so it's got to be a diagonal. So potentially now it's ABC. So that qualifies as a candidate for a third. So then given that, we take the start of the 1 through the pivot of the 3. So sorry. What have we done? Right to the 618 to the tick. So last stand for the 4 right there. And so far, that's been defended. All right, so could 1, 2, 3, 4. Do we have another leg in this to get up here? Well, there's an algo defending it. We know that, right? That's not random. Does that work? Well, it's hard to, that 4 is not real pretty. It's just a straight shot down. So even if we go down to the 15-minute, maybe you can get the ABC out of that, right? It's not ideal, not ideal. So is that a buy? I mean, you'd be buying, so you'd have to work back into this thinking, well, wait a minute, then that means this has to be my low. So having just gone through what we did, I think that's less likely. So if anything, so yes, that's buyable, acknowledging that you're trading into the 5th wave of the proposed C of the 4, right? So it's not terrible risk reward. So if we think about what that would be from a long position, so you take a pullback, we've got an algo target candidate for the 4, so point of control would be a reasonable stop. So that's 6 to 1. So that's definitely tradable if we have this right, if that's a 4. But it almost doesn't matter, right? So what do we know? Swing low. So we have a dominant pivot. We've gone 618 to the tick. So is that tradable? Sure. Sure, that's tradable, but not looking for a trend change, right? Acknowledging that we have not finished down here. We don't have a way to finish this in 5. So, so how significant to your trading is not being able to get a completed Elliott count, right? Can we get is there any way we can get this to finish down here? Well, it's tough to do it, right? So how can you get this into 5? So I think as I showed you here, if this is the 1 and this is the 2, I don't get to 100% till here. So I can't get that to be, there's no other way to count it. I suppose you can make the case that you could do it this way, but you can't. See, you'd have to allow for the 4 to be ultra tiny relative to the 1, 2. So it just doesn't work, right? The symmetry would be wrong. You're force fitting. This couldn't work because then the 3 would be the shortest. So you can look at the length of the 1. You can look at the length of the 5. 3 is gonna. Well, let's not guess. Let's double check it. Right, so we can just do that same thing. So maybe I'm wrong here. So I can take the length of the 3rd, if that were the 4, right? And so it's just barely, right? Just barely. So if we were counting this as 1, 2, 3, and this were the 4, well, we can see that we already know that 1 is longer than 3, and here now we know that 5 would be longer than 3. So does that matter to you? I can't make that call for you. I can just tell you that puts you in on the wrong side of the probabilities. Doesn't mean you couldn't put on a trade that's a winner. That's not what I'm saying. It's just per the Elliott count, you're not done yet. All right, so take that for what it's worth. Right, you can ignore it if you like. Right, so if you're just dying to get long, well, you certainly have a trade there. I certainly wouldn't be shorting it there. Right, so if you were going to short it, that boat has sailed, right? So, right at the 50, right? So even here, where's our target, right? Where's 0? Getting pretty close, right? So 0's, we got a little room, right? So 0's not that good. So here's 0 down here at your 3rd algo target. So we could finish down here. That lines up rather nicely. So this could finish this diagonal to give us the C wave, to complete the C wave. So as I said, there's 6 to 1 trade in that. That's tradable, right? As a long, right? You're going, so acknowledging that you're going counter trend, that the last algo play was a sell at the 50, and you could say, well, maybe they use this, maybe they're maybe they're using a dominant. Would that work? Well, maybe we come up here and we overlap the one. So you got to pay attention to this. So this becomes significant. If we're going to come up here, could this be 1, 2, 3 going into the 4? If we overlap the 1, yeah, it sure could. It sure could. So, but what's it setting up? It's setting up this. All right. So if you're looking to be a buyer here, you know, I'm not saying you. That's. It's certainly there's a trade there. I wouldn't give it a lot of room. I wouldn't put much size into it, but you've got a 6-to-1 trade on the not acknowledging that you're going counter trend. Right? You got to acknowledge that. Going counter trend. So you're playing for the fifth of the C of the 4, really just setting yourself up for the sell. Right? Then we have all of it lining up. Now down here, and would I suggest buying it down here? Well, shit, at that point, you know, but still, even if you were if you got the reaction there, what you'd want to see is some sort of a motive wave come off of that, and then you take this, right? As I've shown you guys 100 times. That's the one you want. The first, get a pivot, get a motive wave, wait for the first 3-wave retracement, right? On whatever time frame you like to trade. Right? I'd want to see that. I might go to the 30-minute. Right? Can I get an ABC coming down? Why do I like that? Because I can buy it here knowing that I have a clear exit point where my assumptions have proven incorrect. So if I'm a buyer here, the assumption is the low is in. Right? So I can be clear about where I'm out. I know I'm going to be out here. So I can take that on the assumption that I can get a 1, 2, and I'm into the 3 of the 1 wave coming off of, you know, that extreme bear market, right? So I wouldn't want to be trying to pick the low down here, right? As a trader, that just goes against my grain. But it's shit. I mean, again, you're down here at, well, you know, again, take note of where 0 is, right? So if you're buying it here, so if you're a buyer here, you know, not that much still to go. So that's what I see. I guess the broader point here is that I do not think our low is in. I can't get that to play where it finishes properly. Can't finish it here. So even if you get this kick up here, it's tempting to think, oh, you know, maybe I could have 1, 2, 3, but you can't because you'd have a diagonal in the 3rd. That doesn't play. So maybe 1, 2, 1, 2. You know, then you got to figure out how you're finishing down here. I mean, it's tough to make that call. So from what I'm looking at here, while there may be one more leg up here to check this 1 and challenge that 50, odds are that that's just a setup. That would just be a bull trap. Sets it up to pull it back one more time. So likely one more low. Then we could have a trend change. But until then, if you're a buyer here, I would sure be very aware of where the next 50 is, right, in terms of potential targets. All right, guys, that's about all I can add there. So we're not out of the woods yet, much as I'd like to be. So I'll wrap it there. Just as always, as I remind you, if you want to learn more about us and how we teach this, how we trade this, you can give us a visit on our website. You can always follow us on Twitter. And stay tuned here on YouTube as we update here pretty regularly. All right, guys, that's pretty much all I've got now. So a lot of hurry up and wait in crypto. Back to you later.